Hello and welcome to Sundays at the Chateau. I'm very excited about this week's video because I'm talking about something that is very important to me, and that's 18th century French decorative arts. When I was in the Metropolitan Museum of Art last week, I had a fantastic time just wandering around all of the incredible period rooms that they have. And I showed some of those to you in last week's Chateau Diaries vlog, but I held the best ones back because I wanted to talk to you about them specifically in a separate video. So today I would like to take you on a tour of the French rooms in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And at the end of the video, I have a very exciting announcement to make because I have finally created the Chateau Diaries Patreon page. Many of you have really kindly asked me to set this up, so I'll tell you all about it at the end. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephanie, the chatelaine of this 16th century Chateau de Lalande in the heart of France. I've been restoring it for 15 years, but goodness knows there are many years of restoration ahead of me before I can feel that I've done justice to this beautiful building. And visiting the rooms at the Met did nothing to persuade me that I've finished yet. My goodness, we have a long way to go. The first of the French period rooms in the museum is the Vahana B Room, which dates from around 1740 and is an extraordinary example of Rococo panelling. But the real showstopper in this room is King Louis XV's private desk from Versailles. Isn't it amazing to think of King Louis XV sitting at that desk, dealing with affairs of state, or maybe writing love letters to his many mistresses? The next room is the Par Room, and it's the only room whose panelling does not come from France. In fact, it comes from Vienna. But there is a very interesting link between the Par Room and the Chateau de Lalande that I want to share with you. The panelling comes from the mansion of Prince Wenzel Johann Joseph von Paar, and he was asked by the formidable Empress Maria Theresa to take her daughter, the Archduchess Maria Antonia, to the French border, where she would change her name to Marie Antoinette and meet the French delegation who were to take her on to Paris to marry the Dauphin, the future Louis XVI. And the man who was sent by King Louis XV to meet her on the border at the French side, well, he was the ancestor of the Marquise who lived here for over 200 years. The red and gold armchair in the room was made for Louise Elisabeth, the only daughter of Louis XV. She was the Duchess of Parma, but the extraordinary thing about this armchair is that it still has its original upholstery. It is exactly the way that the Duchess of Parma would have seen it. But walking around these magnificent rooms in the Met, I became very curious. How did they come to be in New York? The ability to see these period rooms in this way, with pieces that have been saved from the collections of Louis XV, Louis XVI, and Marie Antoinette, has been made possible because of extraordinarily generous donors. And their stories are almost as fascinating as the rooms themselves. By far the most generous donors, and the couple who made these galleries possible, were Charles and Jane Wrightsman. They donated most of these rooms to the museum, including the furniture in them. And you see that tiny little dog bed? That belonged to Jane Wrightsman, and it was made by Claude Senet, one of the furniture makers to Queen Marie Antoinette. Jane Wrightsman was born in 1919 in Michigan, not into a very wealthy family. She moved with her mother to California and had odd jobs, but that all changed when she met Charles Wrightsman, the president of Standard Oil. When they married, he was twice her age. He was 48 and she was 24. By all accounts, he was an extremely difficult man who decided to mold his new young wife into the perfect chatelaine so that they could gain entrance into society by becoming connoisseurs of the arts. He became a Pygmalion-like figure, organising tutors to teach her everything that she needed to know to become the perfect accomplished woman. But she took to the role magnificently, and she immersed herself in the world of fine and decorative arts, becoming an expert in her fields. Many of his friends said he could be astonishingly difficult with her. They could be sitting having dinner and he would suddenly say, "That painting isn't straight, straighten it," and she'd jump up and fix it. She seemed so subservient to her husband in these moments that one of the former directors of the Met described her as the quintessential American geisha. In all of the photos that I see of Jane, I see not only a strikingly elegant woman, but one whose eyes seem to be filled with kindness. Or could it possibly be sadness from the marriage that she was living? Nancy Mitford knew them both well because they used to spend a great deal of time in Paris and in London. And in a letter to Evelyn Waugh, Nancy Mitford wrote, "Old Charlie is the 7th richest man and about the 4th nastiest. But I love him. He makes me scream with laughter. He's always rather sad. Weighs himself twice a day." Cecil Beaton was a close friend of the couple who took many spectacular portraits of Jane, and in 1970 he wrote, "It is tragic to see how aged she's become, shrunk and wrinkled, and one wonders if it is worthwhile suffering for so much of her life. Yet if she left him, she could be penniless." Was the beauty that she surrounded herself with the consolation for an unhappy marriage? Jane was an extremely private woman, so I suspect we will never truly know. What I like about the gifts that they gave to the Metropolitan Museum of Art is that they're not cold museum pieces that were bought from one museum and sent to another. They were bought for their own use, and Jane lived with the pieces for many years before handing them on to a museum. So I feel that they've been lived with, they've been loved, they've been witness to interesting gatherings and dinner parties. Apparently one day, one of the directors of the Met was at her Fifth Avenue apartment chatting to Jane, and he saw an old notebook lying on a table. He flicked through it and asked her what it was, and she casually replied, "Oh, that's Marie Antoinette's last diary." These were the things that she lived with. The Wrightsman had several homes. The first of them was a magnificent mansion in Palm Beach, which Jane transformed into a French chateau by the sea. The panelling was exquisite, and it was the panelling from that house that they later moved to their 18-room apartment on Fifth Avenue. This was the Wrightsman's private dining room in their Fifth Avenue apartment. It's the Cabri room, whose panelling dates from 1770 and has the most extraordinarily turbulent history. The panelling was commissioned for a magnificent new townhouse that the third Marquis of Cabri was building in Grasse, the perfume capital of France. He had recently married Louise de Mirabeau and was building a home for them together. But then tragedy struck. Once the house was built, but before the panelling had even been installed, in 1777 he was declared legally insane. He'd been struck down with a congenital madness that had affected many of his family before him. And without his protection, just 1 month later, his wife was exiled to a convent by her own father because she'd taken her mother's side in her parents' separation. In those days, a woman could be banished to a convent with only a lettre de cachet from her legal guardian. And she languished in her convent prison for 3 years. And during that time, the house in Grasse fell into complete disrepair, and an inventory of 1778 states, "An unimaginable disorder reigns in the house. Furniture lying on a clutter in the floor, the doors standing open without keys, window panes broken, etc. Everything suggestive of abandonment." That inventory also notes 9 crates standing around in the entrance hall filled with panelling, and that panelling was the room that we're seeing here. It was only when she was freed from the convent and eventually returned to Grasse that Madame de Cabri had the panelling installed. The next room is the Tissé room, and this panelling dates from 1770 and comes from a mansion which was once situated on the Quai Voltaire on the Seine in Paris, and which overlooked the palaces of the Louvre and the Tuileries on the other side of the river. And the most exciting piece of furniture in here is the table that Riesner made for Marie Antoinette. The court inventory of royal furniture specifies that it was delivered to her in December 1778, and that it was to be used for eating, for dressing and coiffure, and for reading or writing in a seated or a standing position. The entire table can be cranked up or down to different heights. A button releases a mirror panel that rises up and can be turned around and to read on it, and other buttons open drawers that reveal compartments for cosmetics and perfumes, just as in this table. And you might wonder why you would need one table to serve all of these different functions, especially when you are a queen and could have all of the furniture that you need. But in fact, the table was made for the lying in of Queen Marie Antoinette, and it was delivered just 1 week before she gave birth to her first child. So she was expected to spend a great deal of time in her room and would have needed a table to suit all of her purposes. I think one of the things I love most about 18th century furniture was the extraordinary love of mechanical novelties. Why can't we buy furniture today that's so multifunctional with exciting things that spring out of it all over the place? And I thought I'd make this video next to my favourite piece of French furniture in the chateau, which is this amazing early 19th century secrétaire. I think this is the only piece in the house that is as beautiful as anything I saw in those galleries. Jane died only last year at the age of 99 in her Fifth Avenue home. So if you have a spare $50 million, it is now up for grabs. And Christie's is hosting a huge sale of her belongings on the 24th of April in New York. this year. I would so love to be there to see that. But my two favourite rooms, the octagonal Creon Room and the round Bordeaux Room, were not donated by the Reitzmans, though much of the furniture on display inside them was. The Creon Room was donated by Susan Dwight Bliss. It was actually purchased by her mother and installed in the family's mansion on East 68th Street in New York. Susan Dwight Bliss lived with her widowed mother for many years in that mansion and continued to live there after her death. And she eventually decided to bequeath her amazing collection of books and art and furniture to various museums and universities. But she also gave her entire library, including 1,200 specially bound books, all of the furniture, and all of its 18th century panelling, including a beautiful carved wood Italian ceiling, to Bordeaux, where they've installed it as part of their library, so it can be enjoyed by people today and continues to be used as a centre of learning. And this is the Creon Room, which Susan donated to the museum. It is by far my favourite room here. It dates from 1777, and whilst it's the smallest room by far, I think it's the most exquisite. It's a jewel box of a space. The paintings on the panelling were designed by Pierre-Adrien Paris, and what I love is the ancient Roman influence that you can clearly see in his work. He's based them on the grotesques that Raphael painted on the walls of the Vatican loggias in the 16th century, and Raphael in turn had been influenced by fragments of paintings found on a Roman wall from the 1st century, which was excavated at the end of the 15th century. When he undertook this commission, he had just returned from 3 years studying in Rome. I don't know if you noticed what I did, but the very first thing I saw when I looked into that room was the huge cushion with Marie Antoinette's monogram on it. And that made me wonder if some of the furniture had been made for her, and indeed it had. The same Claude Senet, who made the dog bed that we saw earlier, created the daybed and bergère in this room for Marie Antoinette's new chateau at Saint-Cloud. But she would not have been able to enjoy her cabinet de toilette furniture for long. It was delivered in 1788, and her last visit to the Chateau de Saint-Cloud was in 1790, before she was captured and executed by the French Revolutionary government. The final room in these galleries is the Bordeaux Room, dating from 1785. But maybe the most touching donor story that I uncovered of all was that which lurks behind the gift of this lavish circular room. This panelling was bought by Mr. and Mrs. Herbert N. Strauss, and after the death of Herbert Strauss, his wife left it to the Metropolitan Museum. But who was this Herbert Strauss? Well, it turns out that his father, Isidore Strauss, had been the co-owner of Macy's department store, and he and his wife had been aboard the Titanic when disaster struck. They were standing by Lifeboat 8 when they were told that they could board it because they were an elderly couple, but Isidore Strauss refused, saying that he would not get onto any lifeboat whilst there were still women and children on the ship. He asked his wife to go on without him, but in front of all of the witnesses already on the lifeboat, she said, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." And so they died together aboard the Titanic. And they were the parents of the man who bought this panelling, and whose wife later donated it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Towards the end of the 18th century, it became very fashionable to be more informal, and people looked for smaller, more intimate rooms, and round rooms became very popular. In his treatise on building and interior architecture from 1780, the French architect Nicolas Le Camus de Mézières claimed that round rooms were more lively and curved ones more voluptuous than normal square or rectangular rooms. I realise now that I'm absolutely longing for a voluptuous room. Why is there no curved voluptuous room in my life? Not one voluptuous room in the Chateau de Lalande. Oh no, I'm wrong! We have one circular tower room, which is a bathroom. I have a voluptuous bathroom. Who knew? You can imagine that seeing these extraordinary French rooms made me think of Lalande and what I could do to improve the chateau yet more. There is a reason that we don't have extraordinary panelling here, and it's quite a sad reason. Firstly, a lot was lost during the Revolution, which struck so many of the chateaux in France. But then in the 19th century, tragedy truly struck. The son of the marquise, who was only 5 years old, drowned in the moats of the chateau. She was completely devastated, and in an attempt to do anything to try to distract her, to give her anything else to think about, her husband suggested that she completely redecorate the chateau and replace what had been lost in the revolution. which she did, and the whole chateau was brought back to extraordinary beauty, only to be struck by fire just a couple of years later. After that, the family found that they had the strength to rebuild the chateau, and they built the chapel in memory of their child, but they just didn't have the emotional strength to redecorate again. That time had passed. So although the family continued to love Lalande and look after her extremely well, there were no huge decorative projects after that. And I think it's time for Lalande to be embellished once more. A lot of you will have seen that we won a French televised bed and breakfast competition in France, and we won 3,000 euros, which is very exciting. And I'm going to put that 3,000 euros into a fund to be able to restore the panelling to the Grand Salon of Lalande. That's the room that we're sitting in now. You can't see much of the wall, but there we have a completely unpanelled wall behind me. And that should change. But panelling is astronomically expensive. Just for a small room to find period panelling would cost about 15,000 to 20,000 euros. And then of course I would need to find someone to fit it into place. But if I wasn't the sort of person who believed that these things are possible, I wouldn't have bought the chateau in the first place. And 3,000 euros is a very good start. So buoyed up by the thought of all this incredible patronage at the museum, I decided to do what a lot of people have been asking me to do and set up my Patreon page. The chapel restoration has started. That's being funded by the ad revenue from these videos. And now with the money from Bienvenue Chez Nous, I have started the fund for panelling in the Grand Salon. But goodness knows there's so much more. We still need to put the lake back. And that's a very long story that I'll talk about in a future vlog. But the next step is that we need to do a survey that will cost approximately 5,000 euros just to be able to talk about what needs to be done next to put the lake back. So we're a very long way and a great deal of money away from being able to do that. But as the lake predates the chateau and is probably close to 1,000 years old, I feel that it's my moral responsibility to stop the act of vandalism, as I see it, that the French state have done by forcing us to get rid of it and to find a way to put it back. I would be incredibly grateful if you could give me any sort of feedback on the idea of patronage for Lalande, because I've set up the page and I've made membership tiers with benefits at each level of membership. But I want to know if there are benefits that you think are worthwhile or what you would like to see, because I'm at the very start of this collaborative project where I can team up with people around the world who would like to help to save this chateau. So all of your ideas are very appreciated, because this is something that we should be working on together. At the moment, the entry tier for membership, which would make you a Lord and Lady of Lalande, is $5 a month. And for that, you'd receive a limited edition signed print of the chateau and a handwritten thank you card welcoming you to this community of lovers of the Chateau de Lalande. And all of our patrons will be entered into a lottery to win a stay for 2 people for 2 nights at the Chateau de Lalande, including a private tour of the chateau and dinner with all of us. I'm hoping that our Patreon page will become a place where chateau lovers can meet each other and talk to each other about their interests. And you can also leave any questions for me, because once a month I'll make a special video just for patrons answering all of your questions. And you'll also have the knowledge that you're helping to save a 16th century French chateau. And as you'll see, if you look at the Patreon page, there's a couple of other tiers that we've made as well. And those involve you being personally thanked with your name read out at the end of every Sunday video. And I'll put up little behind the scenes videos of parts of Lalande that aren't usually seen. Little cupboards and tiny rooms that haven't been decorated yet, that sort of thing. And at the highest tier, receiving an estate limited edition print of one of my father's paintings once a year. The higher tiers also offer discounts on staying at Lalande and the ability to pop in to have afternoon tea with me, where I can answer all of your questions about the chateau and show you around. And anyone who supports us at the highest tier will, when we eventually reach our goal and get the panelling for this Grand Salon, have their names written on the back of the panelling before it's installed, so that they're forever a part of Lalande. So these are the ideas that I've come up with so far to thank you for your support, but please let me know if there's things I'm not thinking of that we could do to reward any of our patrons. Your help is so appreciated in this. I'll put a link to our page below, but if for some reason you can't see that link, just do a search for the Chateau Diaries Patreon and you'll find us. I couldn't have made this video without one particular book that I want to tell you about. It's called Period Rooms in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it is sumptuous. And not only that, the photography is exquisite. But the wealth of information on each of the period rooms is absolutely wonderful. I can't recommend this book highly enough, and I'll put a link to it on Amazon below in case you want to get yourself a copy. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of the Metropolitan's French galleries, my favourite place in New York to get away from the crowds and soak up art and culture and history. If you've enjoyed it and you love all things Chateau, then please subscribe to this channel because there'll be a lot more in future. Thank you so much for your continued help and support. See you next Sunday.